start by introducing our esteemed panelists, and then we'll jump right into a discussion-based panel. So less of a individual speeches, where we're after the lunch hour. So we want to have a lively discussion and as much participation as possible. So Professor Marco Ventura is coming to us from the University of Siena, Department of Social, Political, and Cognitive Sciences. He has a background in law and is also an associate researcher at the University of Strasbourg and the French National Research Council. He's played a senior role in G20s of the past, present, and hopefully future, and has also informed EU policy on faith and innovation, and has worked with several other leading bodies, including the ODIHR. Very pleased to have you here, Marco. Thank you for joining us. And we also have Dr. Arash Fazli, who's an assistant professor and head of the Baha'i Chair for Studies in Development. Prior to joining the chair, Dr. Fazli worked as a journalist with The Hindu and The Times of India, and as a principal researcher with the Institute for Studies in Global Prosperity in Haifa, Israel. So joined by really two qualified individuals, we're going to learn together today and explore a very important topic in both the developing world and the developed world. And I will be moderating this panel. I'm the founder and CEO of Bellwether International, and I'm excited to be discussing this. So let's start by talking about what is technology and what isn't technology. For the sake of this discussion, we've kind of decided amongst the three of us that technology includes innovation, so increasing the standard of living while simultaneously easing that lifestyle. Technology includes artificial intelligence, which in the words of Alan Turing answers the question, can machines think? And technology includes communication and connection. And this is where journalism, social media, ChatGPT, and a lot of other different softwares would fall into this category. So thinking about what is technology and what isn't it, how can we start this discussion? We're going to start kind of from a 10,000-foot view and then become more specific in our analysis. So Marco, why don't you start by telling us what is the connection between faith and technology, specifically faith and innovation?
Yes, thank you very much. Let me say from the start that I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your great work in preparation of this panel and now with the moderation. I would start by referring to some work that I had the opportunity to do in a Center for Religious Studies in Northern Italy at the Fondazione Bruno Kessler, which is a pretty unique center because of some very important history. It's been there for more than 40 years. And because of the fact that it is now in a foundation which is 90% AI-based, computer scientists, data analysts, engineers. And I was the director of the center for 6 years. And we decided, along with the researchers and some input from the ICT centers, that our project there would be described as a project for the encounter of religion and innovation, which brings me to your question. And the way we categorized this encounter can be found in a policy paper that we published in 2019, which we presented at several venues, including the UN and the Faith for Development Initiative platform there, and which can be found online by simply searching for Religion and Innovation, FBK, Fondazione Bruno Kessler. And our categorization is threefold. We, in terms of research and also in terms of action, we look at, first of all, innovation within religious communities, how religion communities innovate and how they categorize innovation. Sometimes they might, have very sophisticated system of advancing interpretation and practice, but they actually refuse the modern language of innovation, or they might, limit innovation to certain areas of action. They might be in full acceptance, for instance, of innovation in technology, and they might even use the international terminology for that, including, innovation in English or French, but they wouldn't apply those same categories to theology, for instance. That would be out of the question. I think that, well, based on my encounters, this has been very often the case with colleagues from Islam, which would rather turn into, again, English or French for innovation, and especially, innovation in technology again, but they would rather use the Arabic term bid'ah in terms of, connotating then false or wrong or disruptive innovation at a religious and theological level. So this would be, well, within each of the many religious traditions, with each community there's a challenge about how to innovate within, and that is a very interesting area to observe. And then we have a second dimension, which is how then, all based on that kind of internal work, if you want, internal struggle, religious communities, religious individuals engage with innovation in society. That is the contribution to innovation, which is, again, as you can imagine, so complex and so multidimensional again, which can be, again, if this helps, categorize in terms of both positive contribution, so strengthening, enhancing what is already going on, accepting some general rules of the game when it comes to research and innovation, when it comes to the generally accepted business model, so they could, religious individuals and community, integrate very well in the sort of international landscape and I would say mindset, but they could also be a very strong factor for criticizing that mindset. They might be, sometimes a sort of a factor for drawing back from undesirable innovation. And then there's a third dimension, which is innovation per se as itself a kind of religion, which might apply to science in general, or modernity, or modern ideas in general. So that is, again, ambivalent, because it could be like there's some degree of faith in progress, of faith in technology, which can be positively integrated with religious faith in order to create some synergy. Mm-hmm. But of course, it can also be a case of sheer competition, two competing faiths. Faith in technology, a sort of secular faith, which would not leave any space for religious faith, which would then degrade in conflict. So this would be a first contribution to how faith and innovation, religion and innovation could be seen.
Yeah, you've touched on so many important points. So faith groups, how do they approach innovation? But also, how does innovation integrate into faith groups? Is innovation religion? Is religion technology? And how do all these come together? Really important themes that we'll come back to. When we think about technology, it's helpful to think about maybe a spectrum where some technology is manual, meaning the human input is what's driving the technology, like a car. There's a full spectrum, though, towards automatic, which is that the human input is actually being dictated by the technology. You plug in an address on Apple Maps, and the technology dictates where you go automatically. So thinking about this spectrum, we also need to think about the inputs into technology. And specifically, how do values inform the technology that we consume on this spectrum, manual and automatic? So turning to you now, Arash, can you please tell us about how should values inform this technology spectrum and innovation as Marcos described it?
Thank you, Rachel. for framing this the theme, and also Professor Marco. So I think at the outset, one would have to recognize that there is in the world out there what you would call a naive understanding of technology and its relation to ethics, right? There is this perception that technology is basically value neutral. Technology depends on how you use technology. If you use it well, then it's a force for good. If you use it in a negative way, then of course it causes damage. But actually, if one looks at technology as a phenomena, as a social, an introduction of a phenomena into society, one sees that it emerges within a socio-cultural setting, and it is based on the values that are part of that socio-cultural setting. If one defines technology as the application of rationality, of our collective rationality, to solving problems and to controlling nature and human processes, then there are all kinds of points in this statement where values come in. The first thing is, how do you define problems? You see, it depends on your value. Your value orientation will determine what you see as a problem. How do you see relationships? When you say control or influence human processes or nature, that is underlying that is a certain conception of what the relationship should be. There's a normative position that underlies it. So very quickly, because also we have a discussion following this, I just wanted to summarize a few of the values that are embedded in Western technology, because also one has to understand technology is not just a peculiarly modern phenomena. It's been always there. And this is from the philosopher Denis Goulet. These are some of the insights that he shares. The first thing is, embedded within Western technology is a certain view of rationality, where the world is out there and you are acting on the world, and basically you see problems in the world and you intervene to manipulate, to break down the problem into small parts, then reassemble them, right? So there's a certain problem solving posture that is inherent to the assumption of technological development in the paradigm in which we are. The other very strong assumption, which was discussed in the earlier session, is a certain way of looking at efficiency. Efficiency is of course, we all know, it is seen as the most optimal ratio between your input and output. So the minimum input giving you the maximum output is the most efficient outcome. And this is the understanding, which also informs how technology is developed, what is considered to be a good for which technology should be used. But then this is not the understanding in all cultures. It's not if one brings ethical, spiritual, social values in, and this is where religion comes in, then one has a different understanding of efficiency. There is an example of Bedouin tribes who, when they go to work, for them the most efficient way to go about their work is such that they can take breaks 7 times to say their Islamic prayers 7 times a day. So the most efficient way of work is one that accommodates their connection with God and their need to sustain it through their process of work. Similarly, when they take their flock to pasture, they take a route which allows them to give charity to the poor. Right? So for them, the most efficient path is not the shortest path. It's the path which incorporates their values. But this clearly would not be the way one would think of efficiency when we think from the other perspective. And so one has to recognize it. It's just that this is not the existing value of efficiency is not necessarily the only way efficiency can be understood. One of the reasons is because, as economists would say, it involves externalities. You see, when you make a decision of what is efficient, you calculate costs, you decide what is an internality, in other words, what goes in your calculation of cost, and what is an externality, which is it's not counted in the process of production. So, for example, for the longest time in the West, when they were making cars, safety was an externality, right? And that allowed the cost of car production to be, to be low. But then, when society compelled or car makers to internalize the cost of, creating the safety features in cars, it eventually got incorporated and it became part of the internalities that. And similarly, now with environmental pollution, now it's gradually becoming internalized. So the efficiency decision, values come in that calculation when you decide what is external and what is internal, what is worth considering a cost. Apart from this, when one sees the way technology works in the world, again, it's the phenomena of modern technology. One of the important characteristics is there's something called technological determinism, which is if something can be done in the world of technology, it should be done. If something is feasible, technologists, engineers will make sure that possibility is realized. It is like our obsession with our own creativity. If we can create, we should create, right? And this is what they call Goulet calls the technological imperative, which is, and in this process, what happens is technology is supposed to be a means to an end. But technology becomes an end in itself because you keep having to develop technology. If you've made this version, then you need the next version. And that version then, there's a force inherent to technology which keeps pushing the process forward and without probably enough thought given to how it is socialized, what is the impact of new technologies on society, on human psyche, on behavior. And from this, the last point that I wanted to mention is a recognition that technology has gone out of control. There are many books.
Spoiler alert! Just jumping to the end.
Yeah. So it's this concept of autonomous technology, that basically the way technology is that it's a force that's unleashed in the world and it propels itself forward, and the only solution to problems caused by technology is technology itself. So technological problems need a technological fix.
Yeah, great points. I want to circle back to what you've talked about with time, because this is a tension inherently held by people of faith, which is to say that technological time is speeding up faster and faster, but religious time is actually held in suspension, especially for those believers who follow practices of immortality, eternal life, a relationship with the divine which supersedes time. So we have this tension here between technology and faith. This is one of many tensions between technology and faith, which I think is articulated really well in a recent essay that I read from the New York Times. The biggest questions in life are the questions that artificial intelligence is posing. But it's doing it mostly in isolation from the people who've been asking those questions for 4,000 years. So here we see the tension of time between faith and technology. Technology pursuing truth in a post-industrial revolutionary world, which is clock in, clock out, find the technological solution, become more efficient. Technology then feeds that efficiency in its positive feedback loop. Versus religious time, which is we've been asking the same questions for 4,000 years, and we've learned something and we've developed something that supersedes time. Comment on that. How are you seeing that tension of time in faith and technology, and how do you think the public perceives that, and what other challenges arise from this tension?
Well, I come back to this innovation framework, and a big challenge there is how to combine innovation in science and technology on the one hand, and social innovation on the other. I think that's the big question. Now, social innovation can be a space where precisely time conception and time consumption with technological innovation can be challenged because of the needs of society, the needs of communities. But it can be the other way around. It can also be formulated in terms of we can, precisely as you were saying, we can do this, we're going to do this, and social innovation is just about adaptation to technology. So innovation in technological innovation rules, dominates. That's how I would conceptualize, also based on some experience. Recently, if I can mention this, I interviewed an engineer based at Tokyo University. He's an Italian, he's been there for 11 years, and since 5-6 years, he's been developing what he calls religious robots. And when I first asked him about why he was even doing that, I didn't get a very clear answer, actually, because it was, the first instinct was precisely, well, it's there, the possibility there. There's a lot of development with your robotics. That's robotics. Robotics, it's about applying robotics in all possible domains of life. But at the same time, there was some concern for aging in Japan, which, by the way, was a theme when we had the G20 Interfaith in Japan. We interacted with that. And so there was a question about what can we do with robotics for the elderly people. And then there was something which was very personal to him, which was, I'm an Italian, I'm adapting to Japanese society, am I struck by religious artifacts, objects with a divine spark in them, with a divine function, with a sort of divine activation within them. So, and the combination of the factors made him work on religious robots to assist in the prayer, the elderly people, and that this was developed further. So this is an example that I can offer of how social innovation in science, technology can combine And sometimes it's very much in the gray area. It's not even for, I mean, those who are for the actors, even for scientists, it's not very clear where they're heading and where the resources are. Because when I asked him about, so what's next, what you need, there was a clear, efficiency-based answer, which was, of course, I need more funding. I need a better business plan. I need, it may need to make sense. But then there was something which was, I don't get enough resources from theologians. And he said, I'm particularly interested of history of religious arts, because we had automata already from centuries back. It is not new to have machines in temples, to have machines in the history of religion. And he said, I need to know more about that tradition, those resources, in order to drive my inventions and my prototypes better and better. So I think that this, precisely because it is not very neat, precisely because you have all the dimensions in one single biography, it is very telling about this challenge with the encounter of social innovation and innovation in science and technology.
Yeah, really good thoughts. And to add to that, I think one of the ways we measure the success of innovation is how long the technology lasts, right? So the wheel is still one of the most important technologies of today. Even as all the other software is shifting around that, the wheel cannot be understated as an important technology. So if we think about faith as a kind of technology, it's lasted a long time. Some would say faith is maybe the longest lasting technology. And so how do we bring these worlds together and think about what technology matters in a culture of faith or in a culture of social innovation, and how do we make both technologies last in the same world, in the same context, not where they're in tension with each other, but actually where the wheel and faith are in a symbiotic relationship, where social media and faith are in a symbiotic relationship. And so then both technologies can last, both are successful with time. I want to come back to another point you just said, which is the innovator asking for a theologian buy-in. Where are the religious leaders in technology innovation? Where are we at currently in our current context? What does that look like? I know that Google, for example, has employee belief groups. So they're bringing faith more into the workplace, and they're trying to encourage people to bring faith. But there's still very much a channel where people are leaving the tech industry for faith. People, because of their faith, are entering the tech industry. Let's talk about that relationship in those channels. And what does that look like in the developing world? What does it look like to come into the technology and innovation space in India and have that be informed by faith?
Yeah, I think, again, one has to look at what kind of technology you're talking about, because if you think of India, I would think one of the biggest, like sometimes we tend to think that everything that comes out of Silicon Valley is all that technology is about. But then if you look at one of the biggest technological interventions in Indian society, it was the Green Revolution, right? It was when, in order to solve the problem of food scarcity, there were certain hybrid seeds that were introduced, and certain practices of agriculture. A whole technological mix was brought to Indian society, and of course in the course of the next few decades it solved one problem, which is food scarcity. Now I'm not directly addressing your question. I'm kind of contextualizing it, because developing world, you have to really look at the world, the context. So I think if one now comes to the question of values, of faith, you see, what one sees, what happened to agriculture as a result of this introduction of this technology? If one looks at it from a value-based lens, right, or a faith lens, what one sees is before the Green Revolution, before modern industrial agriculture came, there was the lifestyle of peasantry. Now, almost all over the world now, peasantry is no more a reality, right? Peasantry is not just farming. It's a whole worldview that goes with farming. Farming is one part of a whole worldview where everything that's part of that world is interconnected, right? So the kind of society we had then was one where there was an intricate web of values, which included things that gave meaning to life, things that we believed in, and what we did as a consequence of our beliefs or our normative ethics, right? So what you did in agriculture was very closely connected with your belief in the deities that you worship, your conception of nature. You did puja it's a kind of worship of your tools before you started, because there was a symbiotic connection between your beliefs and your norms. Technology came and it changed the norms, right? The way they did things changed. And in the process of it, people got new motives for doing what they were doing, because this organic connection between your beliefs, between what gave meaning to your universe and what you were doing was broken. And technology broke it, because basically when you introduce technology, you're changing the way people do things. And with that you're changing their society. Now the question, going back to your earlier question of time, you see, if you look at the West as well, with industrial revolution, and which was, again, if you look at it in one way, it was a technological movement. The West couldn't keep religion in the picture. Eventually this rupture just became difficult to connect, to bring back, between your world of norms, of ethics, and your beliefs, because it just takes a lot of time. I mean, your beliefs and your ethics have taken probably centuries or millennia to form. When you rupture that and create a condition of value fragmentation, where basically I'm doing something because that's a professional norm, because that's how the industry says I should do it, it doesn't matter what I believe, right? If you want to now reconnect it, it's going to take a very long time. And by the time you even begin, the technology has already changed, right? So it's almost like a lost cause in the sense of bringing your spiritual orientation to the world into harmony, because you must appreciate this is a social thing. It's not an individual thing. It's a society that has these beliefs. Unless the only way you can do it is if you change the way you bring technology into your society. In other words, if that society which brought green revolution, or the technology of green revolution, decided that it was not going to just adopt every new technology that comes, but was first going to learn how that technology can be socialized, how it can be integrated in a way that values could be retained, then you probably are in a much better position for keeping this interconnectedness between your beliefs. Because otherwise faith remains, I'd say technology is the biggest force that keeps faith in the private sphere, because the world just keeps getting pushed forward with technology, and how do you reconcile it with these?
Yeah, excellent points. And I think certainly the picture you've painted where technology and religion diverge further and further apart is contingent on us. The picture you paint is a story where we do nothing. If we do nothing, yes, technology and religion or faith, belief, spirituality continue to diverge. But now I'm going to counter that with an invitation. The reason we're all here, the reason that we've come to the Interfaith G20 is to actually call upon faith leaders to breach the gap, to refuse to sell into a consumerist mindset that there will forever be a secular silo between technology and faith, and instead take a personal responsibility and stewardship to help bridge this gap. And this is being demonstrated by global religious leaders, whether you're aware of it or not. In February of 2020, the Rome Call was a special coalition between IBM, Microsoft, FAO, Pope Francis, and together they established 6 principles that should help lead this effort to bridge the silo between faith and technology. And their 6 principles include transparency. In principle, AI systems must be explainable. Inclusion. All human beings must be taken into consideration so everyone can benefit from technology. Responsibility. Those who design and deploy artificial intelligence must proceed with responsibility. Impartiality. Do not create or act according to bias. Reliability. AI systems must be able to work reliably. And last, security and privacy. Technology must work securely and respect the privacy of users. So there is an initiative being taken by faith leaders. And one of our recommendations for the Interfaith G20 and for the G20 at large is we need to close the divergence between technology and faith. But it's not just about faith leaders. The reason misinformation prevails, the reason there is a monopoly on social media, the reason Western corporations are able to diverge farther and farther from society and rule with algorithms and consumerism in mind is because no one's taking that first step. And I was just talking to a colleague before this meeting. We were talking about interactions we've had with Meta. My experience has been when you go to them and ask them for a conversation, they say yes. But no one is asking for that conversation out of fear, out of maybe an ignorance of how technology works. Let me reassure you, you do not have to understand the coding fundamentals of ChatGPT to have an ethical conversation about its role in your faith community. And if you wait for the time where you are educated and you're coding yourself, you will have completely missed the opportunity to lead. And you will have completely missed the opportunity to act in a moment where all of us should be acting. All of us should be taking these 6 principles and this stewardship upon ourselves. So thinking about the Rome Call, the invitation to act and to bridge the silo, to be conveners, to be bridge builders, what else can we do to tackle the challenges that come from technology? Because we've talked about all of these different aspects. It goes without saying that technology is a matter of life or death. in a very visceral sense, misinformation is a matter of life or death, particularly in developing countries. So what are we going to do about it? And how do we take these challenges head on with our unique capacities as interfaith leaders?
Should I go again?
You should.
My priority here would be practices and examples, which is also telling what I see as the problem for faith communities when they limit themselves to elaborating principles. Don't get me wrong, I'm very supportive of the AI, their own call. I'm very supportive of various contexts where faith communities and faith leaders have been heard, and they voiced their preoccupation for AI in particular, or other forms of technology, especially digital technology. That's very, very important. That's very timely. That's necessary. But there's a risk, and the risk is that the conversation is held at a level of principles. It's necessary, but it might be a bit misleading because, well, principles are there, they're very important. In certain contexts, there is a real lack of them, whereas in other contexts it's more a lack of application, then the principles are there. But I think that what faith communities, faith leaders, individual believers can contribute the most is through practical examples, through practices. Well, the irony is that I'm sure that this is there, this exists. So there's a lack of mapping, there's a lack of recognition, there's a lack of, sometimes as a, academic, a lack of scholarship, or at least, a case-based scholarship, which might be, difficult to frame in terms of academic recognition, because it would be more of a sort of ethnography of the religious entrepreneur, of the, how this website was devised, designed by that specific community. I would very much advocate for a sort of micro analysis, because that is very telling, example by example. What about the app that you design as a community? What about your investments in the digital industry as a church, or again as a private investor with a religious affiliation? So this is lacking very much at the scholarly level, at a level of communication, and so I would sometimes I'm tempted to call this a sort of dimension of religious illiteracy. So there's some interesting combination of digital and religious illiteracy at a level which is not the obvious level at which we think when we mention both, right? We mention religious literacy and digital literacy with a slightly different meaning. And I think that the two should be combined in an innovative way, and in order to look for concrete examples, like the one I gave before of robots, but there can be so many around, including in specifically in AI. And then you can, if you have examples, you can start figuring out to what extent religious voices are merely adaptive, where they're just following. You mentioned the secular silo, but the challenge for religions is that, just for the sake of that could be a comfort zone for religious people as well. So to what extent are you, a religious individual, ready to challenge your own community?
Yeah, excellent thoughts. And to give a concrete example of practice and modeling, there's a group called AI and Faith, started by a researcher by the name of David Brenner. And they are building coalitions of faith members to talk about different elements of artificial intelligence. And let me just play out in a practical sense why this matters. If you ask Siri to tell you the importance of karma, what is Siri's response? If you ask Alexa the meaning of human dignity, what is the response? And if we're relying purely on secular scientists to code Alexa and Siri to give those responses, then you know how this story ends. So this is a practical example of what we can be doing. Thinking critically about the technologies you use on a daily basis is where we start. Then we think about our connection to our communities, to Amazon, to Apple, to Microsoft. And then we think critically, like David Brenner, about how to build coalitions to approach those groups and say, you know, if you're programming Siri to talk about human dignity, make sure that this is in the answer. Make sure that this is in the fundamental coding. And that's how we take an active approach. And then, as you mentioned, we do need to map, and this is a second recommendation to come out of this conversation, is the G20 should be mapping what efforts are being done so that we can model that for each other and give people more access points to interact with technology from an advocacy standpoint. Because the more we can share these case studies, the more we're empowered to do something. So your thoughts on how we confront the challenges directly, and then we'll go to some questions from the audience.
Yeah, I think, the challenge with technology is you see, sometimes when you look at the choices of should I use technology or not use, or should I do this or that, what we don't realize is technology has presented us with those choices. In other words, it has changed our world in such a way that our choices eventually can become trivial in relation to the magnitude of the transformation that, it's like, for example, should I watch television or no? It doesn't matter. Television has changed your world. It has changed the way people think. It has changed the way politics happen. So one person doesn't watch television. You're still, you see, the kind of I think Marshall McLuhan and a few of these media thinkers talk about how the medium is the message. In other words, the technology is the real message that in terms of communication technology. But coming to specifically to your question, I think one has to recognize that there's a lot one can do, both by looking at cases, but one should not underestimate the magnitude of the challenge. And I think one step in that direction which faith communities can take is basically decouple technology from market capitalism. You see, why is technology, the problem with technology, the way it is now being propagated, is that it is part of a machinery which includes a certain way of organizing the economy, and where technology becomes a tool for profit making, and therefore there is this whole impetus on ensuring people adopt technology. That also determines what kind of technology is developed. If one turns the issue around and says, assume we didn't have this economic model, and as a community we were to decide what are our problems and what kind of technological developments does our community need. Well, I'm sure we'll come up with very different answers. And which is going to your question, that's where the community takes ownership of the process of technological development. And one can see, for example, in India you have tribal communities which have their own sophisticated techniques for doing things. They've developed them socially. You don't know who is the inventor of this technology because it's not market-based. Nobody is applying for copyright. It's something a community decides what they need. So I think a part of the issue is it's going to be meaningless to think of taking ownership if we don't build capacity within communities to first have this conversation about what kind of technologies do we need. That's why I think maybe high tech may not be the first beast to slay. If you want to go at this issue, one has to start with communities. For example, in India now, rainwater harvesting is a technology which people can adopt, which people can make a decision. They can even innovate in how they replenish groundwater, using simple methods where innovation becomes something that ordinary people can do. But the point is that's not a priority. We are not developing the scientific capacity, the technological capacity, and we are not having the conversations within communities from the ground up to think about how one takes ownership of technology as a force that should serve the common good. And then how to grapple with that market-mediated technological development is another question, which I think is very difficult to answer. But I think the more one does this, the more one builds capacity from the ground up, the more people will have the analytical ability, the confidence to make choices. Because otherwise your choices are, it's not very meaningful if you don't really understand the whole issue well.
Yeah, excellent thoughts. So part of what I'm taking from that conclusion is when I think about conversations that are happening in faith, Abrahamic traditions and outside the Abrahamic traditions, all faith groups I know of and can think of are having conversations about what it means to be a spiritual person in a consumerist world. And part of that conversation now needs to include with technology. What does it mean to be a spiritual person with technology? And that's what you're pointing at. And the more conversations you can direct and lead in your faith community on that question will then direct the efforts and the action. And I think it will become manifest over time, as you said, we do actually have stewardship over this as spiritual beings, and there is something we can do. We don't have to play a passive role in the innovation, in the development of values and how those inform technology, and we certainly don't have to allow faith to fall to the wayside in the wake of secular innovation. So turning now to you, what questions do you have about this topic? Some of your questions we'll be able to answer. The ones we can't, we will carefully record, research, and report back. So we'd love to hear from you, and we'll take maybe a few questions at a time, and then we can respond to those. So questions from the group. Yes.
First of all, I want to thank all three of you. It was very, very inspiring and highly uplifting. I learned so much. Rachel, the way you moderated, it was really, and your comments are very, very insightful. My question first to Dr. Marco is, you spoke about religious robots. I'm interested to know more about those religious robots. Are they capable of, doing some religious rituals, or are they promoting religiosity among people? And you also made a comment that people have faith in technology, or they have faith in religion. So in any case, they have faith, which is really interesting, you know. So I don't see actually contradiction. Having faith either in technology or in religion is okay. So what do you comment on that? And then Dr. Arash, you spoke about values, very, very clear and crisp. Technology or media now dictates values. So do we still have a place for religious values? I mean, for instance, religious values like solidarity or beneficence, you know, common good. In a way, technology also is benefiting to humans, or it has improved. I don't know, quality of life. Has it actually improved quality of life, or has it also contributed to the meaning of life? Can you throw a little more light on this?
Thanks. We'll take maybe one or two more questions.
Thank you very much. I'm still formulating my thoughts, but just very quickly, I think technology is evolving and evolving very quickly. I'm not sure communities of faith, and particularly faith leaders, are necessarily keeping up with what's happening. And in order for the conversations that you were talking about that need to happen within the communities to allow for our young people, even the older people, but young people who embrace every new technology as soon as it comes out, to have a level of discernment as to how they might use this or how they might allow that technology to impact their lives. I believe the speed of that understanding as opposed to the churning of new technologies is not quite in sync. So I don't know, there's a question in there for the panelists. But then I have one other. Harsh Shringla yesterday said that new technologies is very much going to be on the agenda of the G20. Those of us that work at the level of the UN have been asking as to whether governments of the world need to have a regulatory body that manages artificial intelligence. And I'm wondering what your views about that is, and whether we need this kind of regulation or whether it's going to limit freedom of expression or freedom of thought.
Brilliant questions, thank you. Yes, we'll take the one in the back and then we'll dive in. We're keeping track of the questions, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So from university perspective and the talents which is coming up from the universities. So ultimate aim of all these ethics and technology is to establish the peace-loving, holistic global society which is a need of the universe. That is what the ultimate. Every faith, they have their own belief, and accordingly they have their chief belief officer which they would like to bring that belief into the entire generations. I'm talking of the youngsters. But there are no boundaries. There is an International Court of Justice in Netherlands, but there is no such type of regulations. What will be the limitations of the technologies? The technologies are coming so fast, vanishing together. The metaverse, the Web 3.0, the AI. I configured as the ABCD, AI, artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud, cyber security, data sciences, robotics, IoT, and so many things. The technologies are coming, impacting particularly the education at large, the generations which are coming, which more majorly we are looking for those who are the peace builder, those who are the peace ambassadors. So I think there is an urgent need of defining those, what you call, I don't know how to use that, but there is some controlling authorities and regulating authorities amongst the use of the technologies to have the one world. So your comment on that. Thank you so much.
Great. So first to you, Marco, about the religious robbers.
Yeah, it's really a work in progress from what I hear. What people involved in the domain are telling me is that this is developing, that there's an increasing interest, including from the community of scientists, which was really not obvious some years ago. And the applications, of course, challenge theology. So there was a robot which was done in Germany in 2017 at the time of the anniversary of Reformation. It was a robot who would welcome people in a church, that would actually bless the people. And it was accepted, theologically at least, seems to me, as acceptable, precisely. Whereas some form of Catholic feedback has been very much contrary to this kind of blessing being acceptable. We know of some different examples in Japan. There's a very famous case, the Avalokitesvara, the Mindar, in a Kyoto temple, also welcoming the visitors and reciting some verses, some sacred text that is acceptable. There is an issue with the shape, because of course that is a general conversation in robotics about the importance of an anthropomorphic. That is a kind of debate. What is more, and again, we're into the technological mindset. Anthropomorphic robots are thought to be more acceptable. Okay, robotics is very much about acceptance. That's the debate. But again, this is a sort of autoreferential word. And again, this is a good test and a good example of where should religion work within this mindset without actually breaking or challenging it? Or shouldn't precisely religion be on the side of challenging the mindset of acceptance? So I hope this is a sort of initial frame. But the monks in the Kyoto temple where Minvar is there, they have discussed and accepted its presence. So it's going to develop. Do you want to also address other questions, or I stop here, Rachel?
Yeah, you can keep going, or we can.
There was this a question on faith in technology, and again, it's my impression is that we have some consolidated framework at least in the West, in terms of the theology of modernity, where we would rather think of a clear distinction between a sort of faith in the progress in general, faith in science, faith in technology, and some form of alliance based on the distinction with faith of a religious kind. Okay, see, this would be based on a sort of distinction principle, a principle of separation, a principle of distinction. My impression is that this kind of more or less consolidated balance is very much contested now. So that's why I'm framing this a framework of faith in science, faith in technology, and faith in religion as really in terms of competition more. Of course, it's always possible to find a balance, but I would see that very much in terms of competition. Also because, if you want me to come maybe I would like to say something about leaders. The digital religion is again a reality. There's a lot of scholarship on digital religion, so we're not really feeling a lack of research there, but we need more research. And what we observe, in the beginning, like the 2000s, the online religion, as it was then, it was more internet and the online religion. It was thought of having a potential for democratizing religion. So it was more of, there was a welcoming attitude from the progressive sectors of religion. It turned out that it's not automatic, it's not obvious that digital religion is going in that direction. But, well, wherever it is going, we observe a very fundamental challenge to the structures of religion, to the organization of religions. The authors you mentioned before of this AI, Rome Code for AI ethics, the initiative has been taken by the Pontifical Academy of Life. You have, the protagonist is not the Secretary of State of the Holy See, is somebody of the Roman Curia. There's a restructuring of who's in charge. I have observed in some churches the digital, the Office for Digital Communication being in charge more and more of fundamental policies of the church, simply because, they have a de facto veto power on the framing of policies, because in terms of easy language or whatever it comes in digitalization, that is not, that cannot be, that doesn't make sense for the communication. And therefore, although the role of that body in the organization of the church is peripheral or minor, in fact, they are the leading body. Their power is increasing. So this is an example. I'm stopping here before getting, but the next step would be the regulatory step, because you have regulation in principle, and then you have the real application. And there's a lot of restructuring, and this is not a minor challenge of technology and the digital in particular to churches, because it's really very important, including in leadership, because if you lack knowledge of technology and there's someone else in the church structure that has that knowledge, your role as a leader is in question.
Arash, do you want to respond to any of the questions?
Yeah, I just, what our friend here, his question, I think this question of the religious values and whether like solidarity and I think part of the you see, now again one could fall into an extreme of now making technology the bugbear. Everything that's gone wrong with the world, somehow it's this force that is causing it. I think what one has to recognize is there's a crisis within religion itself. The Enlightenment was a response to that crisis, right? For example, if you say solidarity, well, within religious communities, there's so much of division. There's so many questions of injustice, right? All religions, I think, if one looks at the organized religion, the phenomena that it has become with religious institutions, and so I think there are questions that need to be resolved within religion itself. You need a normative discourse within religious communities to basically ask themselves, what is religion? What a true religion should be, as against what it is today or what it has become. If we brought the founders of these religions together in a space, you brought Prophet Muhammad, you brought Jesus Christ, Krishna, what would they say and think? How would they behave, right? So for me the question is, how does one basically initiate a discourse within religious communities to see how these communities can move closer to those ideals, where like in the previous session was being discussed, where really this oneness of religion is a reality. I think if you brought the founders together, you wouldn't see much difference in what they're saying or in the spirit that they are radiating. If you brought their followers together, you'll see a lot of difference. So the question, so I think part of the issue is that now technology aggravates what is in society, right? You have division, so polarizing, you use, I don't know, social media is, but it's not like, this wasn't there before, you see. So that's in response. And the other question that Bani was, asking about the question of choices for young people. It's a very personal question for me as well, because I have, two young children, and even before I realized they're into apps which I had no idea existed. They're doing things on in communicating. They're making things. Their world is in app-mediated, web-mediated technologies. So I think what one has to recognize is there's only so much you can do. That's at least, now this is a very personal reflection. What I recognize is you can't put the genie back in the box. Technology is what it is, and it's not, at least not in the short term. It goes back to your question of time. Maybe these things require a really long time frame. But in the short term, what one would need to do, I think, is to think of how does one build the capacity of young people so that they have the discernment, they have the intellectual capacity, the discernment, maybe moral capacity, to be able to use technology as a force for good. Because I don't think it is the case that, for example, I don't know, even social media, you can use it in ways that are positive, and you can, if you are discerning, you can recognize how it's affecting you and begin to control. Again, it won't change the way the world has changed. In other words, we are flooded with trivia, we are flooded with superficiality, and in a sense, our habits of thought, our habits of even prayer, if you go to, our sense of the sacred is kind of profaned by this mass of information, which is, half of it is trivia, half of it is misinformation, and there's something there which is also real. So it's not like that can be wished away. I think we have to accept we are going to have generations that will have to grow up in this polluted environment. But then it's also not like they can't do anything. You see, there's things they can do, and then develop new technologies.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to add a thought to your question and talk about regulation, then we'll close the session. Technology has, and we'll take one last question here. Technology, in my view, is one of the only things that bridges the age gap. But what it requires is enormous humility on both sides. And what the tendency is for the older generation to look down on the younger generation and say, you lack discernment, you lack capacity, and you lack control. That is not the spirit of humility. And if you come in to any conversation, diplomatic or otherwise, pointing fingers, we all know how that ends. What I think is required for faith leaders to keep up with the innovation of technology is the spirit of humility. The spirit of humility to say to their youth, I need you to be expert for the day. I need you to be leader for the day or the month or the year or whatever. And give youth the opportunity to rise to the occasion, which also requires a kind of humility. A humility to say to the older generation, now I'm thinking about the young that are looking up to the old, there are things you know that I don't. There are things I know that you don't. And technology allows us to meet in the middle. That's the conversation that needs to be happening with youth. And if I had a dime for every time in the last year of conferences I've attended where people say we need to empower youth, what they're really saying is we need to meet youth where they are, and that requires this kind of humility. And mark my words, approaching the younger generation by prefacing a conversation as, you're the expert here, tell me how it goes. Tell me how it goes. And watch the youth rise. Watch the youth take ownership of their own media consumption, because now they're being treated as equals and not as someone that needs to be empowered. In fact, the word empower could be incredibly problematic, as maybe you've heard from other scholarship. In terms of regulation, do we need regulation? Yes, I think we're all in agreement. But where that regulation is housed really matters. Really matters. And I want to go back to a point that you made. Is it that we need to regulate technology, or is it that we need to regulate marketing? Is it that we need to regulate political advertisement? Those are two completely separate conversations. And although the United Nations is uniquely equipped to convene leaders of all nations, I am not convinced that the United Nations is uniquely equipped to regulate. And I am also not convinced that governments are uniquely equipped to regulate, because regulation and surveillance flirt on such a fine line and can be abused in so many ways, as we've seen with the advent of technology in countries where human rights are not valued. So I think the conversation with the G20 needs to be, who has the power to regulate? Corporations, marketing and advertisement agencies, and who can hold them accountable? Consumers. And I think consumers need to play a more active role in self-regulating in a way that promotes democratic norms and human rights. Now, there's a lot to be discussed there, and there's a lot of frameworks, but we know this works because we know that democracy works, and the fundamental idea behind democracy is a people that regulate themselves to uphold higher virtues, values, and freedoms. So, with that in mind, thank you for coming. One last question, if we have time, and then we'll close the session. Yeah, go ahead.
I could just make a quick comment.
Yeah.
And then we can discuss the answers or dimensions later. Just a thought, because I feel like still a lot of our discourses and dialogue around technology is very reactive. We're trying to mitigate the harm and the damage once it's already been invented, rather than thinking, really ahead, and also thinking about the actual concrete practical application of technology for the general good, which is still so, social media could have been used so much more profoundly and pervasively for the common good. And there are a few scholars who are working in that area, making those proposals, but it has been tied to this accumulationist, very, individualistic, the corporate and economic system that we're locked into, which now, many people are innovating also, beyond GDP, et cetera. We know we have to tackle the economic system if we're going to tackle the triple planetary crisis. So just this, I would love to hear and see so much more dialogue and discussion about this, like the extraordinary vision of what we can do with current technology, let alone emergent. Well, now we have the AI capacities apparently that are incredibly powerful. How can we actively harness these for the public good, rather than just mitigating or sort of the potential harm or the harm that's already been being caused? And then how do we have to sort of re-architect our various systems in order to actually deliver on the universal promises of faith, to protect the most vulnerable, to abolish prejudice, et cetera, and that was a really promising thought we heard yesterday. This digital public infrastructure. India sharing that with the G20, mobile phone banking, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's because of certain thought and entrepreneurship from certain types of entrepreneurs with this spirit and social entrepreneurs. I would love to hear so much more of that, because faith communities have profound contributions in that area. And with our current technology at the moment, we could be living in a vastly more happy, healthy, well world already with our current technology. So I would love to hear more about those discourses and examples.
Quick response, just 30 seconds, and if you want to add anything. I think that I'm going to share 2 examples of the past to illustrate this. At the advent of capitalism, Weber writes a book about the Protestant work ethic. And that not only informs what capitalism becomes, but how it's integrated into Western society as we know it, fundamentally from a religious faith perspective, number 1. Second case study. Halfway through COVID-19, faith leaders take it upon themselves to get vaccinated publicly, and they make it a PR move. And then they become distributors, churches, synagogues, mosques become distributors of the COVID-19 vaccine. And in an instant, go from reacting to technology, maybe even feeding into a lot of the fear of the time, to getting out in front of the technology, innovating how vaccines should be distributed, how people should be educated on what they are and what they aren't. And of course, there's a whole spectrum of response. I'm not saying that all religious groups responded or even support vaccines, and we respect that. But I am just giving 2 examples of how technology can be seen either as an object or as a lifestyle. And people of faith are uniquely equipped to talk about technology as a lifestyle from these 2 examples, and I think many more that we could unpack and dissect. But that's how you get out in the front, is by teaching a lifestyle of technology that's congruent with faith and spirituality. Any final thoughts?
Well, again, let me say, but then there's a challenging dimension to it, you know. I mean, there's, in terms of what you were saying about humility in approach, because there's a lot of, well, some comfort zone in being on the receiving end. And this is the major challenge for faith communities, I think. They need, well, they can do that precisely. They have a potential, but they have to, well, to exploit the potential. And sometimes I see that they are be reluctant. This quick example, Meta has this consultancy quasi-independent board, the oversight board, and it's carrying a sort of work of revision of existing policies with content moderation with regard to the word shahid, martyr. Very sensitive. There was a public consultation, this is being closed last week. I would like to know which was the contribution to the public consultation from the world of religions. Maybe, again, this resumes, it's a summary to my challenge in a sense. A challenge to knowledge, because this would be a very interesting case to know more about how people from, you know, scholarship with religion, religious communities contributed to their conversation. But it's also a challenge, a challenge in the sense of regulation, self-regulation from the industry, the complex regulatory framework, and again, how religious communities interact at that normative level as well.